filling in for our typical host, Matt Erpelding. It's October, meaning it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and this is part 2 of our cybersecurity series. Last week, we hosted our virtual event focusing on small businesses and their cyber threats, and this week we're focusing on the national and industrial concerns. With our web series, we also provided a cybersecurity guidebook for small businesses that was sponsored by Idaho National Laboratory, and we worked in partnership with Boise State University. This guidebook is really a 101 and how-to on how to engage our members and how to protect themselves during this vulnerable time. The guidebook is free and easy to download, and you can find that directly at our website. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only 5-star accredited chamber of commerce, and we are committed to providing high-quality education and professional seminars, even during COVID, which is why we've been doing these virtually. In order for us to continue these educational webinars, we receive great investment from our members. This series is presented by Boise Office Equipment and is sponsored by HealthWise. Before we begin, we have a brief message from Boise Office Equipment.
In today's world, businesses are more agile than ever. And technology, well, it's reaching speeds that can make it hard for some to keep up. So if you feel like your business is stuck in the traffic, we're here to help. We're Boise Office Equipment, a Xerox company, and we're proud to be your local partner providing businesses of all sizes solutions like Xerox IT services and Connect Key technology, document management solutions, managed print services, and production printing technology designed to deliver a unique experience to your customers. So when you're ready to make a digital transformation for your business, choose a local partner that you can count on.
In today's webinar, we have 3 great guests and experts that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of them, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our event. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Hoda Maybin. Dr. Maybin's research focuses on ensuring privacy, security, and robustness of mission-critical cyber-physical systems. In 2019, she was awarded a National Science Foundation Career Award from the Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace Program. Additionally, in August 2016, she was awarded an NSF CISE Research Initiation Initiative grant based on the proposal that was submitted to the Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace Program. For her work on cybersecurity of the election process in Idaho, she has received funding from the Idaho Secretary of State to establish Ensure. And for her outreach efforts, she received funding from the National Security Agency, NSA, Gen Cyber Teacher Program during 2017, 19, and 20. She received her Bachelor of Science degree from British Columbia Institute of Technology, Master of Science degree from Linköping University in Sweden, and her PhD degree from Oregon State University, and has been a faculty at Boise State University in the Department of Computer Science since 2016. Welcome, Hoda. Happy to have you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to Kurt Pipel. Kurt has spent more than 15 years of his career in the FBI's counterintelligence and cyber divisions working to protect national security. His primary focus has been state-sponsored advancement persistent threat intrusion cases that included cross-jurisdictional cooperation at all levels of government. From 2010 to 2012, Kurt was assigned to FBI headquarters as a supervisory special agent in the cyber division, where he coordinated and led multiple teams that investigated and mitigated various APT threats. He received the FBI's Director Award for Excellence and the U.S. Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service for the groundbreaking case against the 5 3PLA hackers charged with economic espionage in 2014. In 2013 to 2017, Kurt served as the Assistant Legal Attaché in London, representing the FBI on cyber national security matters. He is currently a special agent working cyber and counterintelligence matters for the FBI in Boise, Idaho. Welcome, Kurt. Very excited to have you here.
Thanks.
And last but not least, we have Kara Turner. Kara Turner is a control systems cybersecurity analyst in the Cyber Core group at Idaho National Laboratory, INL. Kara has served years of experience in cybersecurity from Intel and FireEye, where she was regularly sought after to speak at cybersecurity conferences. During that time, she also served as an adjunct professor of cybersecurity at Brigham Young University, Idaho, her alma mater. Since being recruited to the INL 4 years ago, she has thrived on working with utilities to protect our nation's critical infrastructure from cyber attack. Among other projects, she has developed much of the framework and materials for the consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering program. This program works with organizations in electric, oil, and natural gas, water treatment, manufacturing, nuclear, government, and other sectors, and has the personal support of the Energy Secretary and the Department of Energy's funding. Kara lives in Ammon with her husband, a mechanical engineer, their 2-year-old son, and another son on the way this winter. Kara, how are you?
Doing great. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all for joining us today. Very excited for part 2 of our cybersecurity series. So just to kind of start out with everyone, just want to ask how you're all doing, how your world might have changed during COVID. Hoda, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Lindsay. So most of my life is online. I'm imagining that everybody else the same. But, you know, we do our best and we put one foot in front of the other and making it happen.
I like that positivity. Thanks, Hoda. How about you, Kara?
To be honest, it's been pretty great just spending more time at home, especially because I'm really pregnant right now. Sorry, guys. But there have definitely been some complications about, there are some conversations that you can only have face-to-face. And so that has made work difficult in some situations. So I think everybody's just been trying to figure out how to make it work. So I don't know. We're doing good though.
I can imagine all of you working in cybersecurity that transitioning to working from home, you guys have a lot more loopholes to work through than just some of us that you take your laptop home and continue normal business. So interested to hear about that a little bit. Okay, Kurt, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, excited to have you guys all here. We have a great run of show and some questions. Let's go ahead and kick it off with Hoda. What is the state of industrial security in 2020 right now?
So as you know, most of our companies, in order for them to be able to grow, expand, and profit, they have to welcome that digital transformation. That means connectivity, more connectivity of operational technology. And then we are talking about Internet of Things and robotics and all of that, right? If I was talking to you in 2017, 18, I was telling you that we are in a very bad shape. But since then, I have to admit, because of the panels such as these, and because of all the attention that we have given to cybersecurity, we see the awareness level have risen strongly. And when you talk to companies, their priority is management of risk and basically improving their service quality, product quality, and their priority is to basically have a better compliance with regulation and requirement. And as we have seen the changes now as part of the cybersecurity, you do have to comply with those types of regulation as part of your your routine. So when it comes to the prioritization of operational technology and industrial control system cybersecurity, most of the companies, they understand the risk, and they plan for detection and defense mechanism. There are challenges and top concerns that we hear from companies and industrial section is basically the concern for damage, to products and services, and injury and death to their employees and even their in the environment. When we are comparing information technology, cybersecurity versus operation technology, cybersecurity, there is a difference in that in information technology, we basically most of the damage, it remains virtual, but in operational technology, the risk is much higher and it's physical, and it could so that it could cause catastrophic damages. And so there is that risk mitigation part of it that makes it very important. So that's what I would say. I would say that the state is that we have the awareness, but if I tell you that we are all guarded and protected, that would not be correct.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, it's a lot more on the news of the awareness of it, and hearing, a lot of the different hospitals around the nation that have all kind of been hacked and dealing with the repercussions of that are. So Kara, that's a good segue into you. What are the industrial control systems and critical infrastructure, and what cyber threats do they face?
Sure. So industrial control systems, well, let's start with critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is essentially all of the systems that we rely on in modern society to keep things running. So that's talking about like our electricity that powers our homes and our hospitals and businesses. So we refer to that often as the electrical grid. You've probably heard that term. And then we've got oil and natural gas, everything that we need for transportation, everything we need to deliver goods. And then we also have water treatment. All of that is critical infrastructure. So that's just everything we rely on to be a modern society, pretty much, and to thrive as an economy. Now, ICS, or industrial control systems, these are the machines that make all that stuff work. So there are computers involved, of course, but they're not like the laptop that you're using most of the time. They're huge physical machines, like at electric generation and the substations that you see as you drive by in your neighborhood. All of that is called industrial control systems. And they are computers, and there are computers involved, but they're also more physical machines. Like Hoda was saying, that these machines have consequences in the physical world. So if an adversary breaks into like a control systems network of an electric utility, I use that example a lot because people understand it pretty well. But if an adversary breaks into an electrical utility and starts flipping breakers, so basically breaking the connection so that the power turns off, there are obviously physical, immediate consequences of that. Just like Hoda was saying that if you hack a CEO's email or something, that's totally different realm of consequence than what we experience when ICS or critical infrastructure is compromised. So a lot of these systems are often old and outdated and fragile from a cybersecurity perspective. They've been very, very hardened to withstand lots of difficult weather and earthquakes and that kind of thing, but they were built to last decades. So these things remain in place for a long time without having cybersecurity been a focus when they were created. And so now, just in the 10 to 15 years that we've seen these attacks begin to escalate, the manufacturers have began to add in cybersecurity, but it's kind of like a layer on top in a lot of these products. So it's not necessarily baked into exactly how the product works. So we're facing a lot of problems where these components are being increasingly brought online so that engineers and operators can interact with them and control them remotely, which is great and fantastic for our economy and how things work. But it makes things really easy for attackers oftentimes, because these systems just aren't built to handle that kind of interaction with the scary internet as it is. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought of, some of our utilities being hacked and what could be the detriment to happen if, the power or whatever else was completely hacked. Kind of leads into a great segue for Kerr. And just to give a little bit of backstory, it was released yesterday, on CNN, that the city of Detroit was under a massive ransomware attack that shut down the police department's emails, their finance department, printers and whatnot. Kurt, can you talk a little bit about the national state threats to our cyber infrastructure and give us some strategies for people to avoid foreign attacks as well?
Sure, and I'm also going to lump in some criminal threats too, because from especially Chamber of Commerce members, you're probably not raising to the level of a Lockheed Martin or a McDonnell Douglas or a big company that does a lot of work with government entities that you would consider, hey, I'm making something so someone wants to spy on me. But from a nation state perspective, really any company at any time, you can become a target, depending on what you're doing or what you're building or what your subcontractors have. For example, Sony made a movie that upset North Korea. So really at any time, you never know what time, or you never know when you can become a target of really a nation state. Now, from a criminal perspective, really, if you have data, you're a target. And I'm going to run through some interesting statistics I found from Small Business published in 2018. About 43% of the cyber attacks are on small businesses. However, only 14% of those small businesses said that they have the ability to mitigate vulnerabilities with a high effective rate. The really bad statistic is 60% of the small companies that are hit with a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months. And then 48% of the data security breaches caused by malicious intent, human error, system failure accounts at rest. So really the second part of that, whether you're the first part for the criminal or nation state, regardless, your defense should look the same. Nation states are obviously better funded, but from a perspective of the damage it could do to your organization, you kind of want to almost treat both equally. And so I'll talk about, what we can do to avoid these things. Books have been written on it, so and the FBI really isn't in a position to give advice, but I can talk about best practices that I have seen. First of all, your customer data is paramount. Or whatever data you store about if it's a technology piece, but really customer PII is a huge target right now. And so I tell people to look at the best practices we've seen are encrypted data at rest, offline systems completely, depending on the risk assessment that your organization does. I say this, but this can continually be the biggest problem. Patch your systems. Download the Windows security updates. Make sure that's a religious thing you do, and then honestly have a plan. Like game out. If we are hacked, what are we going to do? Who are the people that need to be involved? I liken it to fire drills. Organizations do fire drills all the time, but not a lot of organizations deal with hacking drills, or like, what do I need to do if I am hacked? What are my recourse? I mentioned, because it's so popular now, cyber risk insurance. I'm not an advocate for that, but I'd just say that is something out there in the business world that they use to protect themselves, or at least recover financially. Dual factor authentication is a huge one, and it's relatively simple to implement on most systems. And then unfortunately, spend more money in mitigating those or in enhancing your IT defenses.
That's great, thanks. Couple interesting facts that you said, that all of or a large portion, 43% of attacks can come on small businesses. Our membership is over 80% of small businesses that don't necessarily have those resources, which is why we partnered with INL and Boise State to create at least a small business guidebook to give you the basics. But I think, to your point, Kurt, of coming up with a plan, like a fire drill plan, is probably best, of like, what does happen and what's our most important information that we're at risk for being hacked. So Hoda, we'll go back to you. What are the challenges and that organizations have to overcome to manage their cybersecurity risk?
Absolutely. I want to kind of build a little bit on Kara's comment on defense, and that was that you do need to have that layered defense implemented in order to be able to protect yourself. And so the top concerns that in the industrial control network they do have, the first top concern is conventional malware virus outbreak. They are concerned about threat from third parties, such as supply chains or partners. And as you know, we are globally connected, and some of our partners, they are in other countries, and so this concern of sabotage or international intentional, basically physical damage by external actors or ransomware attacks are most of concerns. And lots of companies, they can't afford to implement and put aside a large amount of budget to go and implement that layered defense mechanism. But what we want to do is to be able to basically identify where you're vulnerable and implement that in a smart way. So the major challenge, I would say, is hiring industrial control system cybersecurity experts with the right skills, which is basically a global issue. And unfortunately, this is even more critical for companies, that they need to integrate, their operational technology with their information technology, and then we are talking about, Internet of Things, ecosystems, and all of that. So that opens them up opens up the system to the outside, and finding the right expertise and finding a suitable partner and service provider that could implement these defense mechanisms and solutions and help you with compliance and regulation. It's most challenging what we hear from companies, and basically the market for this type of talents is already exhausted, and and sometimes is that even the budget is not an issue. Just finding and providing training is the most challenging part.
And Hoda, I think we have to give credit to Boise State. You guys seem to be kind of at the forefront and the leader of cybersecurity. So, and getting a grant from the Idaho Secretary of State is huge for you guys. So kudos to you, absolutely. And we love to hear that, locally, that Boise's kind of at the forefront of some of those talking points.
Thank you.
So, Kara, moving back to you, you were kind of talking about some of the infrastructure and some of the utilities of what can happen. What are some real world attacks on critical infrastructure, and what have we seen, and what were the impacts of that?
Sure. Well, sadly, those cases are increasing a lot, exponentially in the past few years. But I'll touch on a few just to show you kind of the breadth and depth variety of what we've seen. So one of the first ones most people would agree would probably be the SQL Slammer worm in 2003. Now, this was a basic worm, just kind of a piece of malicious software that was unleashed on the internet in its infancy back in 2003, and it got out of control. So it affected about half of the internet back then, just bringing everything to a grinding halt, just by overwriting the computers that it touched with its own programming, and then spreading to everything that computer could touch. So that caused a lot of problems with the internet as a whole, but it got into the Davis-Besse nuclear power station and overwhelmed the system that monitors for meltdowns and affected that for 5 hours. So that could have been really bad, but fortunately the plant was offline at the time. So we lucked out there. And then in 2013, we had a piece of malware called Havex, that some adversaries had infected a whole bunch of third-party vendors where engineers and operators go to download software to interact with their control devices. And that piece of malware would then just go into these control systems where it was installed and sniff around the network and collect all kinds of information. Havex isn't connected with any known actual attacks, but it was a really useful tactic, and it was definitely an eye-opener for those in the industry about how easy it would be to collect information from, or also how vulnerable we are to our supply chain. And then, of course, some of the most notable attacks are probably the ones that took place in Ukraine back in 2015 and 2016. It was a very aggressive and outright attack on critical infrastructure. So the 2015, this piece of malware was known as Black Energy, or it's attributed to Black Energy. So the adversaries got access to a variety of power companies, among a whole bunch of other things, including train stations and airports, lots of other things in Ukraine. And they poked around until one day in December, they began just clicking and shutting things down. They left malware behind them to wipe out systems when they were rebooted, which is fairly standard practice for operators when they notice a serious problem. If they notice a glitch or something, one of the first things they'll do is reboot. And in this case, when they did, those systems were completely destroyed, essentially. So the adversaries also overwhelmed the call center. So the utilities didn't know where the power outages were occurring, and they couldn't respond very quickly. So the bottom line effects of this was that the power outage lasted up to 6 hours in some locations, and that affected 250,000 people in the dead of winter in Ukraine, which sounds pretty miserable. They were only able to get power back by controlling things manually, but it did take them months to regain normal operations. And then, unfortunately, they were attacked again in 2016. Another attack on the grid. So this one is attributed to a really sophisticated piece of malware that is far more scary, and this one is often called InDestroyer. So this piece of malware carried out most of the attack all by itself. That's the scary part. So now bad guys can sell this smart piece of malware that can be adapted to a wide variety of targets, and all a person has to do is essentially get it in the door and tell it when to go. So in this case, it targeted a single transmission station that caused a much greater loss of power than the entire attack from the previous year. So I'll just quickly mention 2 more. NotPetya in 2017 was a ransomware attack that encrypted the hard drives of Maersk Shipping Company, Merck Pharmaceuticals, FedEx, Nabisco, Cadbury, a whole bunch of others. So it just covered the whole, an entire swath of companies in ransomware, so that they were demanded to pay a whole bunch of money in Bitcoins in order to get their systems functioning again. And so there are a lot of cases of just normal malware, normal malicious stuff that gets into a control system and wreaks havoc because those systems can't handle it. And then the last one I'll mention is Triton in 2017. This one is pretty scary. It's a piece of malware that targeted the safety systems at a Saudi Arabian petrochemical plant. So safety systems are there in case there's some kind of physical emergency, like the temperature is getting too high and it's endangering the people who work in this plant or this specific area, then it would automatically shut things down. Well, this malware was designed to make sure that that safety, so that those safety systems did not kick in. So this could cause physical death. I think Hoda mentioned it in her first question that there are real life serious consequences when you start messing around with control systems. So Triton was pretty scary in that aspect, but luckily it was found before any harm was done in this case. But it's definitely a scary trend that we're seeing far more advanced malware and far more deadly malware. But it also doesn't have to be malware. An adversary can just get into a system and tell it what to do, like in Ukraine in 2015. It's easy enough to click a button and turn something off or just change some settings. And it can be pretty difficult to detect that in time sometimes.
Yeah, it seems like, the cyber attacks are just getting more and more complex, and probably easier for people to just click, the little text message that they get, or email, or, whatever that attack might be. So Kurt, transitioning just a little bit, going back, we do provide a small business guidebook that kind of breaks down a lot of these terms that all of you guys are using. A lot of them we probably don't use in our common language every day. So we do give some of those definitions, what they mean, and then we also provide a lot of footnotes in there so people can go do additional research on their own. But Kurt, turning it to you now, what actions is the FBI taking against malign foreign influence?
So obviously a hot topic given the election coming up. Malign foreign influence is just a fancy word for nation states trying to disrupt our electoral process. And they'll either distort political sentiment or public discourse. They don't want to undermine confidence in the democratic process and the values and goals that it takes to achieve those. Now, I will say that there are foreign influence operations that contain a wide spectrum of foreign activities, and some are perfectly permissible, such as country advocates for interests diplomatically or through overt public relations. We're not talking about those. When we say malign, What the FBI is specifically investigating is subversive, undeclared, criminal, or coercive activities to those entities. So when we get into, these activities can target U.S. officials, U.S. persons through intelligence tradecraft. They can be social media. There's a bunch of stuff already out there that is in the news that people have probably heard a lot since this election is coming up. And so, what are we doing as the FBI to combat that specific threat? Is in 2017, Director Wray set up a foreign influence task force back in DC, and it's specific individuals in the Bureau that have a great expertise in this from a cyber and counterintelligence backgrounds, and they're there to investigate and combat these foreign operations that the FBI sees. With that task force also works with our other intelligence partners, our local partners, and it bleeds down into the division itself. Specifically in Boise, I have met with my local contacts at Homeland Security, and I met with my local contacts at Secretary of State. And we've had, for the past year, we've had ongoing discussions and tabletopping of scenarios and game planning of what could happen during this election from a national perspective, as well as local focus.
Awesome, thank you. Hoda, turning it back to you, again, we talked about that Boise State has kind of been at the forefront of cybersecurity in the program that you guys have developed. What do you guys do at Boise State to help our local and national community overcome the challenges of cybersecurity?
Absolutely. So we have 11 cybersecurity faculty in computer science department that and we have courses. I teach a course, Cybersecurity of Critical Infrastructure, that we would welcome control technicians, engineers to come in. And what we do, we will discuss, if you're designing and developing programmable logic controller, for a control system at the PLC level, at the distributed control system, at the supervisory control and data acquisition system. We teach you how to write these codes in order for them to be safe and secure. We have lots of tools and algorithms for software, but we don't have that many guidelines for control systems and our engineers. So we would love for them to register for these courses at the computer science department. And you don't really need that much of a background. We just want you to help you with what you do daily. How can be able to look at the data, sensor data, and be able to understand them. And we have a bunch of data science courses that it helps you with the anomaly detection. What comes with industrial control system and Internet of Things and all of that it's lots of data, and making sense of those data, that you have it in your historian system, and understanding what is happening in the system. It's the key, and every one of us could benefit from understanding the data, understanding the system, and from that we can predict what is happening and create our defense mechanism based on that. So we have programs and we have companies that they partner with us and they want us to come look at their current system. We have fabulous undergraduate and graduate students at Boise State University. And we sign non-disclosure agreement with companies, and we help them out. And our students get to practice the theory that they learn in the class, going to the actual companies and see it in action and help them out. So we would really welcome the partnership, the help that we could provide to our companies and industry in Idaho. We have a strong relationship with Idaho National Lab, INL. We have collaboration with them. We have publications, research. We have students that they do internship internship there. So these are all great opportunities here in the state of Idaho. And we at the Boise State University Computer Science Department, we want to partner with you. We welcome you in our classes. And please let us know, reach out and let us know how we can help you.
That's great to hear. And, one of the things I love about Boise is the partnership that we do get with our local university and our partnerships with our companies as well. And the computer science program is growing, I know. And, Boise is now known as the mini Silicon Valley and kind of our tech bubble, and great jobs, great paying jobs in Boise. You guys are, putting well-educated students into the workforce. So that's awesome to hear.
Thank you.
Kara, turning it back over to you, what are the potential impacts of a cyber attack on my local utility, and how much money are critical infrastructure organizations spending on cybersecurity right now? And even more so, I'm curious, your staff at INL, how big is your team for a large corporation? What's the size of team that you guys have?
Well, both of those questions have varying answers depending on an awful lot of supporting information. So let's talk about local utilities. That depends on a lot of things, most particularly what is being targeted. For example, if you're looking at a small scale attack on a local power substation, that equipment could potentially take out power for a neighborhood for a few hours, like in Ukraine in 2015. But utilities can often reroute power if need be. Things like hospitals generally have generator backups, and they might have power coming in from different electricity vendors or providers. But a broader attack on an electric region or a company can potentially cause widespread outages for days, depending on what equipment is targeted and how severe the attack. So there are lots of backups and plans to prevent or minimize situations like that. But it's definitely worth noting that some of the most crucial equipment used for long distance power transmission and for power generation, also for oil and natural gas, also especially for nuclear, some of that equipment could take months or years to replace and is often not manufactured in the United States. So we do have some weaknesses there if the adversaries are able to take advantage of that. The nuclear power sector is very similar to the electric grid, but they have a lot more safeguards typically than any other industry for understandable reasons. But there are still definitely opportunities for improvement there. What often gets overlooked are things like the water treatment and manufacturing goods sectors. Most water treatment plants don't have much, if any, of a budget for cybersecurity, and they rarely have any cybersecurity expertise on hand. So consider if an adversary compromised the instructions their control systems follow, basically the code that their computers use to create safe drinking water, and they don't have a lot of manual inspections where things are stopped and manually inspected, we could be drinking untreated or unsafe water. And then as far as manufacturing goods, we just saw how fragile that sector was earlier this year during the great toilet paper outage of 2020. These organizations often don't have cybersecurity budgets or experience either. So if those systems were taken out by bad guys instead of people just not being able to show up because of COVID, we'd all be running to buy bidets. So there's definitely opportunities for improvement, but some of the most attractive targets to nation states are definitely nuclear and electric. But if we saw them make moves against these other even more vulnerable sectors, it would be pretty interesting. As far as how much entities are spending, that is also a very broad scale. Larger utilities spend millions on cybersecurity, and small co-ops and small utilities like a community electric may not have a budget at all or very, very minimal. But oftentimes you can spend an awful lot on flashy new equipment, but it might not be implemented properly, so it might not be protecting you as much as you think. Or there are easy ways to get around it based on where it was installed. So as far as how big our team at INL is, oh goodness, I think I don't entirely know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we have amazing support, and they do a wonderful job of handling incidents. We are constantly under attack from other nations and other entities who wish to gain access to the research that we're doing and steal it for themselves. And they do a fantastic job of defending us. I don't work day to day with the people that are defending the lab in particular. But let me go back to budget for just a moment. What's more important than a specific budget is knowing your own systems and your own weaknesses and anticipating potential attacks so you can make adjustments before anything happens. So that's why we in CyberCore, my team at INL, we work with utilities to complete a process called CCE, which is consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering. That's kind of a mouthful, but it's been endorsed, supported, and funded by the Energy Secretary and DOE for several years now, and is going strong. It's basically just understanding what functions are most important to your organization and what bad things could happen to them. And then we work through how they could occur. So people like me would say, well, if I were the bad guy sneaking into your network, this is how I would accomplish this horrible nightmare day for you that you really don't want to happen. So then we work with them to follow through on exactly how that would occur. And then we take steps to prevent that before anyone actually attacks. So this is based from the engineering perspective, so from the control side, with cybersecurity experts offering their advice on what the adversaries would do. So with this framework, we can often entirely eliminate the possibility of critical attacks, often without buying trendy new solutions. Sometimes we can just take away remote access. Sometimes there are different options to make this physically impossible from an engineering standpoint. So we worked through it with a variety of entities, and we're currently in multiple engagements right now, and we've got a number lined up in the future. But if anyone is interested in learning more or participating in CCE, they can check out inl.gov/CCE. So.
Awesome, great, thank you. Now moving on to our last question before we wrap up, and definitely a relevant topic, Kurt, for you to discuss. What are the threats to the upcoming elections? How vulnerable are these systems, and should we be concerned about voter fraud?
So I'll start with the national level. The FBI is the lead U.S. agency in investigating malicious cyber activity and election infrastructure, and we investigate it with extensive experience. We work. The work we do ensures security of election systems is no different than really we do every day working with critical infrastructure. As with most critical infrastructure, election infrastructure is constantly getting hit by cyber threats from various actors, which can include intrusions, leaks, attacks against voting infrastructure, targeting U.S. persons and elected officials. As I mentioned earlier, we have a foreign influence task force. It also encompasses some of the cyber threats that we're working proactively to protect systems. We work with DHS to respond quickly if there is such an attack. And then we also work with intelligence community partners to look at attribution. Now, with that said, I also like to talk about what does this matter for the average person. These are major threats against voting systems that really, from a day-to-day perspective, people can't really do anything about other than what the FBI and other agencies are doing. What I look at as the biggest threat to elections is misinformation, and this affects the individual specifically. And we're talking about what we've read in the paper about Twitter feeds that come up and spread fake news or anything along those lines. And what we've seen recently is posts that are specifically saying you can vote by email, fax, text, you can vote online. All those are false. And then it also can, we've seen posts giving the incorrect day for the actual election. And so what I like to say is, hey, from a personal level, what you can do to combat this is who you're talking to online, where did the information come from? Double check your sources of information. Don't just take something that you see once and say, hey, and repost it to the world and say, this must be true. This is what I believe. And then be aware of social media deception. There's a lot of it out there. look up your polling places from official sites. Secretary of State has all that information for you. Be aware of deep fakes. I don't know if in your cyber primer you talk about deep fakes, but a quick Google for most people you can look at what deep fakes are. Be aware that those are out there. And then what we like to say is, if you see something suspicious, please report it to the FBI. Now, from you mentioned voter fraud. And what I'll echo our comments from our director that testified is, to our knowledge, no foreign government has attempted to tamper with the U.S. vote counts. Cyber criminals essentially compromise voter registration databases, but such compromises have never impacted voting process or election results. We are remaining vigilant, especially during this election. We've had, like I said, about a year's worth of scenarios going on. Basically, we want to ensure the integrity of this specific election and the electoral process remains intact. I have, like I said, I have worked with Idaho Secretary of State and Homeland Security specifically for Idaho. We've had, like I said, we've gone through scenarios, and I think we're in a good space here.
I'm glad to hear that, you guys are prepared for worst case scenario. So that's always promising. Okay, just to wrap up with everybody here before we conclude for today, COVID obviously is the elephant in the room. How has it changed the cybersecurity industry in a few short months? We'll kind of go around. Hoda, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. As I've said, since our lives are more online, the cybersecurity vulnerabilities are more visible than ever. And based on what Kurt said, getting our news from social media, not having that much face-to-face conversation. So definitely, it's more upfront and more important than ever. So I think that's what the COVID has brought in the last since March, and is not being prepared for such events. If the phone lines all go down, or if the supply chain disrupts. So all of these is a result of COVID, and as a result of that, cybersecurity important as ever.
Kara?
Yeah, I think that obviously with many more of us working from home, and just from the control systems or critical infrastructure perspective, they had to do all kinds of things to try to eliminate physical contact among their employees, even though they had to handle these critical systems. So some companies, I suspect, are cutting down staff, or at least removing some of that redundancy where they would normally have a practice of having multiple people on site to double check something. That's definitely more difficult than it used to be. Also, a lot of people, a lot of utilities are increasing their remote management of these systems, which adversaries are definitely taking notice of that. So I think, yeah, I would agree with Hoda's statement that it's just brought a lot more of that to our faces, and it's very difficult to ignore at this point. There is hope, but we just need to keep working on it. It's just something that we can't ever stop improving our cybersecurity, because the adversaries aren't. So,
Kurt, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact, honestly, has been on the business aspect, is that because of COVID, they had to push all their infrastructure and all their people outside of their normal corporate security model. And I think that's been the biggest impact, is because either if they hadn't thought about it before, or they had such a small number of people that could work remotely, that they just used those models and expanded it. Well, these people at home now are maybe it's a change of venue. They're not thinking the same way, but we've seen a massive uptick in ransomware. And I don't know if that's people clicking on things more, or if it's because the infrastructure to surround those remote places are in place. So I think that's the biggest challenges for businesses. They have to think, which is, I guess, not necessarily a bad thing, but how do they remotely secure like they would in a corporate environment where everyone's sitting there? I think that's been the biggest struggle, and we've seen a lot of criminals take advantage of that.
Awesome. Well, Hoda, Kara, Kurt, thank you all so much for being here today. I know I'm not the typical Matt that you all expected, but I appreciate it. As a reminder to everybody, we do have a small business guidebook that we put out there free to anybody on our website, thanks to Idaho National Laboratory, in conjunction with Boise State as well. Thank you again to our sponsors, BOE and HealthWise. Thank you all for joining us today on today's webinar on cybersecurity, and we'll see you all next time.